Welcome to In-House Legal Uncovered, a Major Lindsay and Africa podcast exploring what it takes to make it in-house.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of In-House Legal Uncovered in 2024. My name is Michael Sachs, and I'm a partner at Major Lindsay and Africa in our in-house counsel recruiting group. The theme of this podcast continues to be, as always, candid and engaging conversations with leading individuals in the legal industry. And so far this year, we've spoken to several general counsels with great insight into the legal industry and how they've become successful and what the future is going to bring for lawyers and their teams. Every now and then, I like to mix it up and talk with other individuals who play a key role in the industry. And this week, I really have the pleasure to speak to someone who has had an incredibly successful career as a general counsel and lots of other accomplishments as well. He's near and dear to my heart and played an important role in my own professional development. Please welcome Paul Williams to the podcast. Paul, thank you for joining me today.
Delighted to be here, Mike.
Paul, I'm going to give the folks your background. I'm not even sure this does it justice, but I'm going to kind of read a version of it so people know who you are. Paul is a seasoned Fortune 500 public and private company director. He's a former Fortune 20 C-suite executive and former president of the National Association of Corporate Directors, the Chicago chapter. Paul received his undergrad from Harvard and his JD from Yale. He is the retired executive vice president and chief legal officer of Cardinal Health, a Fortune 20 Ohio-based global healthcare services company. And after leaving Cardinal, Paul honed his human capital skill set and joined MLA, my company, where he conducted legal executive searches throughout the country for 13 years and is still a part of our MLA family. Paul also served as co-leader of Major Lindsay and Africa's North America CEO and board practice through our Allegis Partners affiliate. Paul currently is a member of the board of directors of two publicly traded companies, Public Storage and Air Transport Services Group. Since the beginning of 2020, Paul has also served on the board of directors of a cluster of numerous funds in the American Funds Mutual Fund family. And over the past 21 years, Paul has previously served on the boards of directors of 5 other publicly traded companies, State Auto, Ascendant, Bob Evans Farms, Compass Minerals, and Romeo Power. And during his service on these various boards, Paul has served as a lead independent director, compensation committee chair numerous times, and nominating and governance committee chair also numerous times. Paul, let's start with having you walk briefly through your career. I feel bad of asking you to just summarize it in a couple of minutes, but I always ask people, my first question is, how did you kind of get from there to where you are today to here in a couple of minutes?
Sure. And again, I'm just delighted to be here, Mike. You know, it's funny because if someone had asked me the direction of my career when I graduated from law school in 1984, I would have said that from there to here would have been a straight line. and obviously it didn't turn out that way. And what I mean by that is my career really took some twists and turns along the way that I would never have anticipated, because when I graduated from law school in 1984, I fully anticipated becoming a law firm partner. I started out at Gibson, Dunn & Crutcher in Los Angeles, and I grew up in LA. And when I joined that firm, I fully expected to spend the entirety of my career at that firm. But instead, what ended up happening was I spent the first 21 years of my career practicing law, and my wife and I met my wife in law school on the East Coast, but we moved to Columbus, Ohio. And so I spent the first 21 years at a combination of law firms and also couple of in-house legal departments. And so I think the first kind of twist that my career took that I didn't anticipate was that after spending several years at law firms, first Gibson, Dunn & Crutcher, then a Columbus-based firm called Vorey, Sater, Seymour & Pease, I decided to transition in-house. And I did that because I thought that it would be interesting being closer to the business decision making. And so, again, spent 21 years actually practicing law. The culmination of my legal career was at Cardinal Health, where I joined as the deputy GC and then was promoted to chief legal officer. I was there at Cardinal for about 10 years altogether. And then another twist occurred. I was approached by a partner at Major Lindsay in Africa, Miriam Frank, about the possibility of maybe pursuing another chief legal officer position. And she and I met at the airport in Chicago. And, I told her that that I didn't have an interest in that particular position. And she looked at me, she paused and she looked at me and she said, well, what about the possibility of joining a search firm? You seem, Paul, like someone who potentially might have an interest in or be good at recruiting. And that was the beginning of the second part of my career, which was very different from the first part, because I decided to take the plunge and to join Major Lindsay in Africa. And it really appealed to me from the perspective of using a different part of my brain. The first part of my career, traditional legal practice, was focused on, the analytical, logical side of me. But the second facet of my career was really more people focused and business development focused. And so I spent the next, about 17 years at Major Lindsay in Africa doing recruiting work. And then the third part of my career that I would mention, Mike, and this part really bridged both the in-house legal practice part of my career when I was a general counsel and my recruiting work. And that third facet was board service. So I've been serving on boards of directors for 21 years, a total of 7 publicly traded companies and 1 privately held company. So that's how I would kind of summarize it. But again, I thought my career was going to be very linear.
Yeah.
When I started out, and it was everything but ultimately.
Yeah. Well, we're going to spend a lot of time today talking about boards, because I really would love to hear you talk about it. But we should just say, you and I are not, we're not doing this as an arm's length conversation. Paul, I met you 2008, I guess, when I started, and you were very influential in getting me to join the in-house practice group. I think you saw me working, quote unquote, people can't see me, late hours, which I think was like 6:30 or something like that. It wasn't even that late, but we would have these great conversations at the end of the day, and you were always nice enough to stop by and talk with me a little bit. And then an opening came up, and I joined the in-house group, and you and I worked together for about, what would that be, about 7 or 8 years or so, pretty hand in glove in a lot of matters. And so obviously I've known you. We're obviously good friends as well over the years. And so I still quote your advice on various things to people. Heather and I were just talking about this the other day, some advice you gave us about how to train somebody at doing this. And we were comparing some of the great notes you gave us on how to interview candidates. So so your middle stage there, I was a witness to it.
That's right. And very much enjoyed our partnership.
Of course, absolutely. Well, so on the board side of it, so I think many people listening to this are going to know a lot about them, but I want to assume that people like me, early part of my career, were very ignorant of boards in many ways. So how did that career kind of start for you? I mean, it seems like it was very early on in your career you were involved with them, even as a law firm associate, but how did that grow from that into when I met you, when you were already on several public company boards, even during your beginning of your tenure at MLA?
Yes. So certainly my first interaction, Mike, with boards was in the context of my providing advice to boards of directors, and not as a member of a board. So really from the first couple of years of practicing, and this was in the law firm world, I had some exposure to boards of directors in connection with acquisitions uh, and other transactions, and provided advice to boards on transactions, and also provided advice as they grappled with corporate governance issues. So that was during the first probably, let's see, probably 15 years or so of my actual practice. And then once I became an in-house lawyer, then obviously I had even more interaction with a board of directors in my capacity, first as a deputy general counsel and then as a chief legal officer. So that was different from providing advice as an outside lawyer. And ultimately, as the chief legal officer of Cardinal Health, I provided considerable advice to our board, and interfaced with them quite a bit, and also the heads of the various board committees, et cetera. In terms of my own board service, and that came about 21 years ago, my first directorship, and ironically, I wasn't looking to join a board at the time, and so it really came out of the blue. What happened was, and this was when I was the chief legal officer of Cardinal Health, one of our directors on the Cardinal board was retiring from all of his directorships, and he approached me and inquired whether I would have an interest in succeeding him on an insurance company board, State Auto Financial Corporation. We were incredibly busy at Cardinal at the time, but I decided to take the plunge, and so I joined my first board as an actual board member in 2003. And since then, I again have served on a total of 7 publicly traded boards and one private board. So that was kind of the evolution of it. So in terms of my interaction with boards, first as a legal advisor, and then as an actual member. And I've served, as you mentioned at the outset, I've served as a lead independent director. I've served as a comp committee chair, a nominating and governance committee chair multiple times. So I've seen boards from a lot of different angles.
So let's talk about that inflection point when you left Cardinal for MLA. Is something that's a very unique decision. You don't see that hardly at all, obviously. But the interest in being even more involved in boards must have played a big factor in that, or maybe not. What was the thought as well when you made that move? There must have been some passion for getting more involved in boards as part of what the second stage of your career would be.
Yes. And I'm a big believer, Mike, that life and specifically careers have different seasons, different periods when we have different interests. And I think it's really imperative that people are self-aware enough to understand when the seasons change and when they're potentially interested in doing something else. And so for me, that transition from practicing law to going into recruiting work, part of it was driven, as I said before, by the element of wanting to do something more people-oriented, maybe a little less analytical, something more business development focused. So that was certainly part of it. But another aspect of it, and you just hit on it, was the opportunity to spend more time on my board work. So as a sitting general counsel, and I think this is true for just about every GC, realistically, you can only serve on one board at a time, because it's
Yes.
quite time consuming, and there are just a lot of constraints. My recruiting work, even though I was quite busy, as you know, since we worked together, it offered me the opportunity to have a little bit more control over when I did what, and how my day was structured. And so I was able to fit in more directorships as a result of that. And so I juggled a couple of different directorships while I was doing my recruiting work. So I was able to expand my board service considerably once I made that transition into executive recruiting.
Well, and having worked together for those years, I know that one of your great passions also is in the area of diversity, particularly where diversity needs to be improved. And so as you thought through this inflection of getting more involved in boards, more involved in recruiting and human capital or whatever, there had to have obviously been a very obvious interplay between all these things and you to get more involved in another passion of yours, which is the diversity part.
Yes, yes. So since the very, very beginning of my career, I've been extremely focused on the importance of diversity, and being African American and diverse myself, it's just part of my DNA to be cognizant of the importance of diversity, particularly within the legal profession, which, if we're honest, historically has not been a bastion of diversity. And so when I look back on my, first my legal career as an actual practicing lawyer, there weren't a lot of people who looked like me, certainly in the law firm environment in the early 1980s. And then once I made the transition in-house and became a chief legal officer of a Fortune 20 company, there weren't a lot of people of color in those types of roles. And so I've always been very aware of the fact that I have a responsibility as a person of color to, well, because I was the beneficiary of so many people who came before me on whose shoulders I stood, I was very aware of the fact that I wanted to have a legacy in terms of other people standing on my shoulders, in terms of advancing diversity, in terms of maybe leaving the legal profession in particular in a different place than what I found it to be when I first started practicing. And so in every element of my career, whether it's the law firm world or whether it was the in-house environment, or as a member of a board of directors, I've always been a very, very staunch advocate of the need for diversity. And at Cardinal Health, I served as the chair of our first international diversity council, company-wide diversity council. And then when I made the transition into the recruiting realm, diversity throughout that period was something that I was very focused on advancing, and that meant counseling clients, for example, on how they could improve their diversity, and it certainly encompassed, making sure that the slates of candidates that we presented to our clients, that those were truly diverse. So as you can tell,
Yeah.
this is something incredibly important to me. And I'd like to think that I've really helped to make a difference in terms of advancing the ball on diversity.
I certainly think, many of the searches I worked on with you, I'd like to think that we did, and a lot of the searches we worked on, I'm sure many other searches that you worked on with other MLA colleagues over the years as well. So, and as I said at the beginning, there's so many topics that you and I could spend, hours on, frankly. Let's go to boards. So I don't want to dumb this down too much for people, but boards for dummies or something like that. But just quickly, like for people who don't, maybe people who just haven't had a lot of involvement in their careers with them. What is a board of directors? What does it do? What's the purpose? Just give us just the nuts and bolts, and then we'll kind of get into the more substantive questions of it, just for people who aren't involved with them as much.
Sure. So a board of directors, and I'm specifically going to be focusing on public company boards.
Yes.
There are nuances, obviously, and differences between a privately held company board and a publicly traded company's board. But I'll focus on public boards. The board is responsible for the oversight of the company, is the short answer in terms of what the focus is. And there's really a critical distinction between the role of the board versus the role of management. Management is responsible for running the company on a day-to-day basis. A good board certainly understands that is not its role. We are not running the company. In fact, we only meet periodically. Most boards meet on a quarterly basis in terms of regularly scheduled meetings. And so there are lengthy periods of time between our meetings. And our focus is on oversight. Our focus is on making sure that the company's strategy, making sure that the selection of the CEO, certainly, that those things are on track. There are a number of things that the board has input into. So, for example, executive compensation at the very top level. So there's a compensation committee of a public company board that's responsible for setting the compensation for the Section 16 officers. Other areas that boards are involved in, audit oversight, making sure that the financial statements are accurate. And again, in terms of the cadence of boards, we meet episodically. And if there's a critical issue, we'll obviously have a special meeting. Maybe it will be virtual or telephonic. But typically, we meet several times a year, again, on a quarterly basis. And in terms of size, most public company boards probably average somewhere between 6-7 members on the low end, up to maybe 10 on the high end. And obviously, there's some exceptions to that.
And when you have a board meeting, how long are they? Are these all-day affairs? Is it where are these meetings usually? Is it at the company, or is it I'm being sarcastic here, but is it at a hidden location? And I've always wondered about this too. I've been in a couple non-public company boards, for nonprofits, but what's the mood? Is it tense? Is it friendly? Is it, is there some humor? I'm sure it depends a bit on the circumstances of what the themes of the conversation are, but take us behind the curtain a little bit.
Sure. So in terms of the locations, most of my boards try to have the majority of the meetings at the company's headquarters or a hotel that is pretty close to the company's headquarters. But we usually reserve 1 to 2 meetings a year to get out and observe what's happening in the operations of the company. And so we travel to other cities um, and take tours of the facilities and really try to press the flesh in terms of meeting um, employees of the company, significantly further down than just the executive ranks. So that's what happens in terms of the locations. In terms of the mood, certainly that varies from company to company and from board to board. I'm very fortunate in that I would characterize all of the boards, Mike, that I sit on as being very collegial. And what I mean by that is, yes, there's serious business that we have to take care of, but we always try to, between the discussions of very serious issues, we always try to have have a repartee or have some lightness to the conversation. I'm very much a firm believer in relationships in every context. Whether we're talking about a board, whether we're talking about any type of organization, nonprofit, corporate, et cetera. So for a corporate board, it's essential that we have strong relationships with each other. And one of the ways to do that is to be able to have a light moment, to have some fun. So it's not all oppressive, serious conversation, thankfully. And to be honest, if it were like that, if it were oppressive, I wouldn't be spending as much time doing what I'm doing.
Well, then there's like in Hollywood, every time there's a board meeting, it's the most dramatic circumstances possible, or there's an interruption, and everybody.
Right. And there's a long table.
The long table is in a dark room, and
and people are wearing ties.
Well, I think I don't mean to go on. I don't mean to go on a tangent, but I think the first time I even heard of a board, I think I might have been 11 or 12, and there was a show called Max Headroom, and they would have this board, and they would meet in this incredibly dark room, and everybody just looked so serious and looked like they were
so solemn.
I think they were committing murder. I don't remember really the plot of the show, but it just seems so oppressive to me. I'm sure I would like to think it's not like that. So Paul, when a company is selecting a board, what characteristics are most or common characteristics are most people looking for? Like, I know there's different things for different circumstances and companies, but what are common themes that you feel like you hear all the time?
Yes, and this is something that's near and dear to my heart, Mike, because I've served as a nominating and governance committee chair for several of my boards. So I am immersed in this. What I would tell you, first of all, is that we are looking for someone who has business savvy. It's just so important that a board member doesn't get so caught up in for example, the governance niceties or some arcane point that they lose sight of what the purpose of the company is, which is to be financially successful and to operate obviously in a way that's ethical, in a way that is commensurate with the company's values, but we do need to be profitable. And so in terms of the people that we're looking for people who are good business people and who understand how to go about building a successful company. So that is certainly a quality we're looking for. Secondly, and this is on the intangible side, we are looking for people who are going to be collegial, people who are not going to basically upset the delicate balance that we have on the board in terms of having productive conversations. So really don't want to bring somebody onto the board who is going to be obstreperous and who is going to monopolize the conversations or be derisive. We don't need that. Life is too short to bring somebody like that onto the board. So those are a couple of key things that we're looking for. Ideally, the person will have had prior board experience, but that's not always the case. Sometimes we'll bring someone on who is serving on a board for the first time.
And so what about the other way? So Paul, you get approached about, joining a board, and you're doing your due diligence, your homework on it. I imagine there are people out there who are, very strong candidates to be on boards. What's important to them? What's important to someone like you as you're looking at an opportunity? What are you weighing?
Sure.
What would an average candidate weigh?
Yes, and I'm so glad that you asked that question, Mike. It's critical for me, and I think this is true for the vast majority of board candidates, that the chemistry is good with the potential board and with members of management of that particular company. And when I say chemistry, what I'm talking about a couple of facets. Number one, ethics, and the commitment to doing what's right and not cutting corners. Different boards, different companies have different ethics, and usually you can get a good sense when you are in the context of being a candidate for a board. You can get a sense as to whether that's going to be a good fit. I'll put it that way.
Right.
You get a spidey sense of, I'm not sure that CEO is really going to be aligned with me. So that's certainly one thing as a candidate that I would think you would be looking for. Secondly, there's risk calibration. So for different types of companies, there's a different comfort level in terms of risk. Risk from a regulatory standpoint, risk from a financial standpoint. And so the candidate, the person who's thinking about going onto that board, really needs to look inwardly and needs to be candid with himself or herself as to where they're going to be comfortable. And if you're a very quote unquote conservative, risk averse person, going on a startup board and let's say in the tech industry, probably is not going to be a good fit. And so those are a couple of factors, I think, from a candidate's perspective that people consider.
So one of the important questions we're covering today are lawyers and boards, being a board member. Paul, I'm sure when you were at MLA, day to day at MLA, you were hearing it a million times, and I do too, right? A lawyer who's had an amazing career, nothing but successes, great law firm experience, great general counsel background. They're happy in their role, but they're looking for that maybe last pyramid to climb, and they always love to be considered for board opportunities. What should they know? What should that incredibly experienced, very successful general counsel know about their ability to be on a board? I'm sure you've been asked this question many times.
Yeah, this is extremely near and dear to my heart. And what I would tell you, first of all, and what I would tell a general counsel out there, for example, who is considering whether or not she should pursue a directorship, there is a myth circulating, and it's a widespread myth, that no boards are looking for people who are lawyers by background. It's apocryphal, it's a myth. Uh, the reality is, and the statistics show, that somewhere between 42 and 45% of public company boards have at least one lawyer serving on them.
Mm.
So we are on boards. That's an incontrovertible fact, notwithstanding what a lot of people would say. And not only are many of us on boards, many of us are in leadership roles, whether that means the lead independent director role, or the chair role, or compensation committee chair, or nominating and governance committee chair. Many GCs or former GCs like myself have served in those various capacities. So the opportunities for GCs to serve on boards, those opportunities exist. And what I would say, Mike, by way of advice to a general counsel, I think it behooves a general counsel to try to get that first directorship while he or she is still in a general counsel role, as opposed to waiting until one is retired. Because it's getting that first directorship is usually the most challenging.
Yes.
And then once you have gotten that first one, then the others tend to flow more easily after that. So as I mentioned earlier, my first directorship was 21 years ago when I was General Counsel of Cardinal Health. And then subsequent to that, I've served on 6 additional public company boards after that, as well as one privately held company board. The other thing I would say about the process, if a general counsel, for example, pursues directorships, it's a different process than, for example, finding another general counsel job. And people, I think, need to understand that. First of all, it's very, very time consuming in terms of the length of the process. So in other words, since boards only meet periodically, quarterly, very easily it can take 9 months from one's first meeting
Right.
to actually hearing whether or not you've gotten traction and are going to be offered a position on that board. So you have to be patient. The other thing I would say, Mike, that people need to understand is that the resume that one should use is different for a directorship search as opposed to, let's say, a general counsel search. So I always counsel people to use something that's more akin to like a law firm bio, as distinct from the traditional general counsel resume that has a chronology of positions. You know, you want something that's maybe a narrative form, just a few paragraphs, that makes it clear what you're potentially bringing to that board. So those are some of the nuances there that really make the board search process distinct from a general counsel search.
Well, and I jumped right into it with that question of a general counsel wanting to become a board member. But I probably should have taken a step back for a second and actually talked about general counsels in their role as general counsel interacting with a board, which I also know is a topic that you and I've
Yes.
talked about before. So people who are general counsels who are listening to this and they want to make sure they've got that right relationship with the board, what should they know? What's important to a board when you think about the company as its general counsel? What do you can expect from that relationship that might be different from the relationship with a COO or somebody else at the company? Like, what are your
Yes.
expectations? What should that GC know?
Yes. I think first and foremost, Mike, my expectation as a board member of a general counsel is that he or she is going to understand that their obligation, their responsibility is to the company and not to other members of management, and specifically the CEO. And sometimes there can be tension between what the CEO wants personally and what's in the best interest of the company. And really the buck stops with the general counsel in terms of discerning the differences there. And sometimes GCs are in the unenviable position of having to make tough calls as to whether or not, for example, they need to bring something to the attention of the full board as distinct, from the CEO. And so just really understanding where your obligations are. That's number one. In terms of other expectations that boards have of GCs, communication obviously is key. So the ability to cogently synthesize and convey complex subjects, that is tremendously important. There are a lot of non-lawyers on these boards, and if a general counsel, gets stuck describing some obtuse legal theory, that's just not going to work. And then the last thing I would mention in terms of what we're looking for, we're really looking for people skills. We're looking for emotional intelligence. And I'm a big believer that not every person has the same level of emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
And it's critical that when the general counsel walks into the room, that she is able to get the lay of the land politically and interpersonally when she looks around that table, and be able to read people and be able to on the relevant matters for which she's responsible, lead people to the right conclusions and understand what they need to understand. And so EQ is a critical aspect of it. And also EQ obviously influences the ability of the general counsel to be a good consigliere with the CEO. And that's a key relationship. And so as a board member, if I don't believe that a general counsel has those qualities, then I'm going to be skeptical about that person's competence and effectiveness.
Well, one of the other things we hear a lot is a company will do a search, and we're talking about what's important to them, and they'll talk about we need somebody. They'll say, general counsel experience preferred, but we're also willing to look at some number twos. Then in a separate sentence, they'll also say board experience is really important. This is going to be a complex board. It's a good board, but it's a complex board, and they really need to be experienced. That's going to be important in the role. So how is a number two lawyer listening to this right now, a deputy or an associate general counsel who feels like they have all these skills, they're ready to be a GC, but they haven't been given the chance to be in front of a board and have that experience? What do you tell them? What's
yes,
what's the advice?
And when you say board experience, you mean, I'm assuming, the ability to interact with the board,
presenting
to the board, or at least be in the same room.
Yeah, so, not just preparing materials. I mean, the actual being in the room with them.
Yeah. So what I would say, first of all,
because I would say, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but it's like a chicken or an egg thing, right? They're like, well, I can, but I need to be a GC, and so you hear that sometimes from them. Didn't mean to interrupt, but that's
Sure. Yeah. So what I would say, they should be pressing their general counsel to have exposure. So in other words, if let's say someone is just behind the scenes preparing materials, but they're never having any direct interaction with the board members, they need to articulate to the general counsel that that's really important to them, and that at some point they really would like to have that exposure. They would like to attend at least the committee meetings, even if maybe they can't practically speaking, attend the full board meetings. Usually there's a little bit more leeway with respect to the committee meetings than the full board meetings. So they should be voicing that preference, that desire to the general counsel. If, let's say, it becomes clear over time that they're never going to get out of the back room, so to speak, they're never going to have that interaction, I would say they really need, Mike, to consider whether that position is a good fit for the long term. So in other words, it may be a situation where they need to make a transition to another company.
Contact your friendly neighborhood MLA search consultant.
Exactly. To increase their odds of having that exposure. Because to your earlier point, if you're going to choose between, if you're looking at two candidates for a GC role, and you're choosing between someone who's already had the experience and exposure with the board versus someone who hasn't, there's obviously going to be a strong bias in favor of the former. So people sometimes need to be savvy in understanding maybe when they're going to need to take another step as opposed to just staying put where they are.
Letting circumstances affect them versus
taking
ownership.
Sometimes you need to be proactive. Yeah.
So, Paul, earlier we talked about diversity as one of your key passions. The boardroom. Looking at it from however long you've practiced now since you become involved, to even 5 or 10 years ago, to whatever metric you want to use. Has diversity improved with boards? How has it improved, and where maybe is there still work to be done? I know that's a very broad question that can take hours to talk about, but how would you summarize?
Yeah, I would say, Mike, unequivocally that yes, when I think about where most boards were 21 years ago when I first went on a board versus where most boards are now, there is a difference. There has been progress. Are we where we really need to be? In my opinion, the answer to that categorically is no. But there has been progress. But it's been gradual. It's been slow. It's been incremental. I would love for it to accelerate. But it's a process. There are more people of color serving on boards. There are certainly more women serving on boards than there have been historically. But we need to continue to push. We need to continue to have candid discussions about how to move the ball forward in the same way that that's true for the management teams themselves. So there needs to be diversity within the uppermost ranks of management, as well as diversity on the board. But board diversity obviously is extremely important in terms of setting a tone for the rest of the company. So if someone is an employee, or let's say a potential employee at a company that has 10,000 people, and that person looks up the website to see the bios of the members of the board, and that person looks at that group of people and doesn't see anyone who looks like him or her, that's going to be demoralizing. That's going to be deflating. And I think that it's important that at the very top, and the board represents the very top of the pyramid in terms of the governance of the company, other than the shareholders themselves, that diversity is key in terms of sending a message to the rest of the organization.
Well, Paul, so not a week goes by where somebody usually doesn't ask me at MLA, hey, what's Paul up to these days? Tell to your MLA family who's listening to this right now, what are you up to? People wanna know what's professionally. I know you're on a couple boards, but what are you up to?
Yes. So, well, first of all, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that very much enjoying myself as a grandfather, and that's something people who know me well know that I've been talking about becoming a grandfather, Mike, for at least 15 years, and now that opportunity has arisen, and I have a grandson who is almost 11 months. I fully have embraced that opportunity, and I'm hoping that I have many more, grandkids in the future. So that's a
Sure.
key part of my present as well as my future. In terms of other things I'm involved in, I continue to serve on several boards. I'm currently on 2 public company boards and 1 mutual fund board. So I feel intellectually engaged. I feel, I feel that it's a good mix in terms of being busy, but not too busy. And then I'm very, very involved with a nonprofit called George Jackson Academy, which is a middle school for uh, boys from underserved communities in the New York City area. And that's something that I'm very, very passionate about. My dad grew up in the South Bronx. A lot of our boys at George Jackson Academy come from the South Bronx and areas close to where my dad grew up. So that's something I'm passionate about. But I feel very blessed, Mike, to
Yeah.
be doing what I'm doing now during my retirement years. Oh, and I also would be remiss if I didn't mention, nutrition and exercise have always been very, very important to me. And so now that I have more time to devote to those things, I meditate and do yoga and really try to be healthy. Try to be healthy.
Well, now, when every time somebody asks me the question of what is Paul up to, I'm going to say, you should listen to my podcast interview with Paul. He tells you exactly the answer. You can hear it directly from him. I don't need to translate
Yes.
for you. I've got all the information I need right now.
That's
And if
right.
you recall, I do know the George Jackson Academy. If you recall, I made a donation a few years ago, and there was a snafu where I almost made a donation that would have bankrupted my entire family, and so I had to correct that. But I did make a donation because it's a wonderful engagement. I had a chance to listen.
Yeah, we very much appreciated that, Mike. And my eyes, I will confess that my eyes really widened when I saw the amount. I thought, wow, Mike is really, really,
Well,
really.
without getting into the details of the story, people can always ask me about it. Don't make donations on your phone while you're at a red light, because you're bound to make a massive mistake, which is what I did. So, but I did make a donation.
Some of the zeros can get transposed and create issues. So,
Exactly. Well, Paul, thank you so much for sitting with me and talking to me today. This has been a great conversation. Again, we could have gone for hours on a whole host of different topics.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me, Mike, and please give my best to all my former brethren at Major Lindsay in Africa. So.
Thank you. Absolutely. That will do it for this episode, everyone. We would love to get your feedback on these podcasts. Feel free to email me at msachs@mlaglobal.com and tell me what you liked, what you didn't like, and any suggestions for future topics of episodes. We'll continue to roll these out once a month, including our December episode where we do a look back at the year in legal recruiting. So long, everyone, and thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening to In-House Legal Uncovered. Join us next time as we dig into another topic that will better help you navigate your in-house legal career.